Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? This is an active participation session, so feel free to jump right in there and help each other out. My name is Marty Foose, and I'm the past president of the Notre Dame Club of Dayton. We're a B-size club, and I think I got chosen because we just transitioned out of me and into the next president. And my two colleagues here, Anne LaFlamme, I'll let you introduce yourself.
I'm from Spokane, Washington, and I am the immediate past president of the Spokane Club and on the national board for the Region 1, which is in most of the Pacific Northwest.
And I'm Michelle Cahill. I am the full-time director of the Notre Dame Club of Chicago. So I am part of the transition process on an annual basis for our board of directors.
And she's been through many transitions, so we all come from, I would guess, a very different background. Spokane is
now technically it's a C-size club, but we only have about 20 dues-paying members, so it's a quite small club in reality.
And we're kind of middle of the road, and of course Chicago is the biggest club in the world. So
we have a region.
We have a region.
Yeah. We were tasked to put this together, and we soon realized that there's really no blueprint here. There's no one-size-fits-all. We had heard rumors, we don't know if this is true or not, that there was an attempt to make a one-size-fits-all transition plan, and it just, didn't work. There isn't really one of those. But we did some talking among a number of class members, each in our separate regions. In addition, different sizes of clubs, and I even walked around last night and was just chatting with people, especially the clubs that had won the awards, just to see how they did it. We also talked with the business school, and there's a director of a nonprofit excellence program. His name is Professor Thomas Harvey, and we were getting some ideas and some articles from him. So while we don't have a blueprint for you, we do have some ideas, suggestions, principles, and I guess considerations. And I think your input into this session, tell us how you do it at your club, I think would really help us. Please.
Or where they've stumbled.
Where you've stumbled, because we've all stumbled as well. And, so please contribute what you can. That's what really helped the morning session. I think that's what's going to help us here.
Okay, so one of the first things we've called out, which you heard at the keynote session here, is how important it is to identify and ask potential leaders early. There's a number of facets to that. Identification is key, and again, we encourage you to think about alumni, parents, and friends. Some of the most passionate people in the world are the Subway alumni, including our Volunteer of the Year this year. So think expansively about folks who are engaged with the mission of your club, which is different from club to club. Identify them early and then ask them to help, because a lot of people would like to help, but they don't ever get asked, or they get asked at one point and it doesn't work for them because of work or something, and then no one ever asks them again. So learn how to ask for help. It's not something that comes naturally if you're a talented, self-reliant person, but you're going to need to learn to ask for help. So
you're really planning, maybe not, in this part, you're not really looking for that next president. You might be looking for the president 3 or 4 down the road. And, so you have to constantly be looking to enter people into some of the more easier roles. You just have to be of that mindset of always greeting people and expecting that if they sort of check out right and they look interested, that they're going to get an ask.
I also think it's important that it's everyone's job to kind of help recruit leadership and volunteers. So from a committee perspective, every committee member should be involved in bringing in new talent, identifying talent if there's just regular committee members or someone that's volunteering at an event that's of value, and making a note of that. In Chicago this year, we developed a formal handout identifying succession planning amongst committee members. And we have a sample out there floating around, but it gives us the opportunity to identify folks that are ready for leadership positions now, and then also identify folks that might be ready maybe a few years down the line. So future leaders, whether that's committee chairs or even into executive officers roles over time.
You want to make sure that you give people the training and experience that they need, so that they're ready to go when time comes.
Right. So I think there's a variety of ways of doing this. Again, nuances of the club, maybe it's a more formal written process. That's something that we do in Chicago. We have a formal board member handbook that we give out to new board members, and then we have committee templates as well. For some clubs, it may just be a more informal process, one-on-one meetings with your committee members. I know Anne has some advice in terms of apprenticeship models or mentor-mentee relationships that might work in some situations.
Yeah, and you may be able to leverage someone in your community who doesn't have time to serve on your boards or your committees because they're very involved with something else, but they may be able to mentor one of your younger members or someone who hasn't had work experience, and you want to teach them how to, if you have a young person that you want to teach how to do the ask, you can probably find an older person that has been doing the ask for another charity for a long time. Right? But you can also think about having vice chairman or assistants to the directors of an event and get people to start getting a feeling for what's involved in the planning. And they can help you identify the skills that they're going to need to develop to be successful in that role. It's a professional development experience as well as a leadership development for your club. So a lot of people are receptive to it if you say, we're going to build you up, and in return, the club will also be built up.
We, in our club in Dayton, we try to always pair someone who's going to take over the chairmanship of a particular event or committee, pair them up, and it may be several years. I think our golf chairman has been apprenticing for about a decade now, because the other gentleman is still involved, but it's become something that they do together. Just getting other people involved to see how it's done and learn on the job is both more fun for those folks, but also works out well. I always thought I would follow a model of, if you're doing something and you're going to be leaving, you need to find your replacement, and it always hasn't worked out that way. How do you do it in your clubs? How do you do the apprentice thing? Well, we can switch to that. You want to do that?
Sure.
Oh, that's fine, yeah. And I think we can also talk about what we heard in this morning's session. Some clubs have very well-defined terms in their bylaws, which they may or may not be able to pull off. I fogged the mirror in Spokane and was made president. Marty was much smarter than I was.
What I did, our club, there's a lot of clubs that do every year cycle, and they just keep moving through. But for Dayton, Ohio, that's too much. It would be chaos. So what we do is, it's yearly terms, but it's usually about every 3 or 4 years is what it ends up being. Rotate. And
I thought
I
Detroit
made
was
sure,
interesting. Oh yeah, you had a good
I
point.
made sure that I didn't take the position until we had someone ready to take over when I was done. And the deal that I made with my, president-elect was that I would be in the role from between 2 to 5 years. I wasn't sure yet at the outset how long that would be. It ended up being 3 years, but that I would, expect them to learn while I was doing my thing.
It's an annual process. So, for example, for our president, you're actually signing up for a 4-year term because you go through first vice president, or second vice president, first vice president, president, and then immediate past president. So it really is kind of a mentorship along the way. You get a lot of experience from the moment you sign on as second vice president through. As Ann mentioned, Detroit was really interesting in terms of they actually rotate amongst their executive officers. So by the time you're president, you've already served as treasurer, you've served as secretary, you've served as vice president. So that was the first time I had heard of something a little bit more unique, where you get a good taste of every aspect of the executive officers of the club.
And think about that. I mean, they, from Detroit, they were rotating someone through the accounting position, through the treasury position. And that's hard to do. We certainly don't do it in our club.
Yeah, we don't do that either, so.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, it's,
Which club are you with? Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
so and Pittsburgh was here this morning, and they are they're double A?
Double A.
A or double A size club, okay, with Pittsburgh. And they talked about their process worked really quite well for a while, and then it stumbled. And you need to acknowledge that the best laid plans don't always work out. The bright, shiny hope that you have to replace yourself may, in fact, get transferred to China, right? And they're not going to say, oh, I can't take this fabulous job promotion because I promised in 2 years I'd work as the board president. So I think it's important to plan on the unexpected as much as the expected and hope that everything works out, but know what you might do if it doesn't.
Mm-hmm. And, yes. And you're from Cleveland.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and that's right. And that's what the vice presidents really do. We're usually pulling from our larger scale fundraisers in terms of our executive officers. So they've had experience leading those large scale events. Once in an executive officer role, they're more of an advisory source. They serve on all of the major committees. Again, not so much on the active planning stage, but again, advisor, kind of eyes and ears for the club. It gives them good perspective in terms of what we're doing on a full club scale versus just that one narrow event where a committee chair would take place.
Yes.
I am the paid person.
Okay, so, and we can, I just resolve any of the tax issues, so I've that now, and I've now become a supportive member of the university, I just talked to the tax guy there, so we're a big club, and we have a lot of responsibility, but if you have a full-time person, you can't have a full-time person, you have that, now even limitation, if you're over $600 a year to pay someone, that's a problem.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe that's something, I mean, you have the benefit of being literally campus almost. So is there a way to leverage the student workers here on campus or your own scholarship foundation folks to do, right, but even to do some of the administrative stuff, some of the communication pieces? I know I mentioned to someone, summer interns are a great source of help, maybe for that short summer period that they're in town, where, maybe you are only paying them, $600 over the course of a few weeks, but you can get a lot accomplished in that amount of time. There's a lot now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, we-
Yeah, I don't have any check signing power at all. So I do all of the accounting, like numbers but dollars are. I print the checks, but I do not sign. Exactly. The treasurer's role at my office is checks and balances. He comes in to do all of the checks and balances, make sure all the reconciliations are correct, and then all of the audits for tax season, because we're not under the university's umbrella.
can we circle back to the question about the vice president's role? We heard from one of the clubs earlier today that they have 2 vice presidents, and they've taken the 6 C's that you've heard about in terms of the program of excellence and divided them into internally facing and externally facing. I'm not exactly sure the arrangement, but they basically have carved out 2 parts of the club just so that the vice presidents see something in more depth rather than just skimming across everything. And then they swap, which.
I'd like to know your thoughts on this too. Another position that we found was hard to rotate people through on their way to the presidency was the Alumni Schools Committee person, because they end up on such a rigorous yearly calendar that once you get someone trained there, you'd like to, keep them there for a while. But how many people include alumni schools for their, I guess, path upward in their clubs? That's part of what you do.
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, I guess for us, a lot of our stuff operates as committees.
Sure.
A lot of our affinity groups, ND Women Connect, the Minority Alumni Network, we operate as committees. We don't operate them as kind of separate entities. And I think that helps in kind of the recruitment process, the helping with transition, making sure we have kind of backfill in order to facilitate transition and not have the same person year in and year out.
I think really one of the principles we had come across was, and it was the same thing stated by the gentleman in the session prior, is that it's a good thing to infuse new blood in. I think it's a dangerous thing, and you can imagine some situations that are particularly dangerous where you have someone in a position for a couple of decades. And when I was thinking about this, I guess the way I put it in my own head was that if someone is building their own personal fiefdom, if they are, well, you've run across folks like this. They want it on their resume. They want it to, show how much in charge they are. I've run across a lot of very good people that like their own thing. And when it becomes a situation where their personal pride comes ahead of the club, that's when they've been there too long.
But and you have the opposite problem, which is someone is quietly competent, and so it is assumed that he or she is still enjoying the role and or doesn't want help. And so you focus time filling all the other problems because you're fighting fires all the time, and you get someone really get burned out after 10 years of running the newsletter or doing the golf tournament or whatever, and you just assume that they like doing that. So if you have a small club, you might have less opportunity to say, hey, we've got 20 people on the board, so now it's your turn. There might be 5 or 6 people who are, in fact, running the board, but you might get some invigoration by rotating tasks within that crowd. And just...
If you're the president, you need to be the one that makes that decision that someone needs to be transitioned to a new role, or, helped out.
Yeah, the Alumni Association and or your regional director can help you if you have someone who's parked and not moving but should move, right? So whether they're in the role in title but not doing anything, that's terrible, right? But also if they've made it their personal world and they don't want to work collaboratively, are not willing to take new ideas, are not willing to train their replacement, all of those are unfortunate things, and you have resources at the Alumni Association that can help you deal with it. It happens every year. Someone's got to deal with it, so.
So now let's talk about plans.
Sure. So again, it depends. Every club is unique. Every club's going to have kind of club culture, and plans may be really formal. In Chicago, we have something that's fully written that we give to all of our board members when they start their new term. And some clubs, it might be more informal. Again, one-on-one meetings, I think, are really important. It's a great way to pass on knowledge in a less structured way. But again, having a plan in place is really important, I think, especially when preparing for any sort of emergency situation. You don't want someone to move and then you have no knowledge whatsoever about the event that they were running. So I'm curious to see if all people here have written plans in place, or they're more informal, kind of, word of mouth kind of transfer of knowledge, or a little bit of both. Okay.
In
Count, yeah. We have a couple of sample. I know we have one sample that we're working on. I think that's from
Harrisburg.
Harrisburg, and then I don't know if I still have any copies of the Chicago, but I'm happy to send it to you electronically.
I can say, though, that there's really different personalities of the leaders, and the clubs will react viscerally to having a written handbook. So there are folks who really value process and documentation who will tell you that you are insane to do anything other than to have a manual like this. Okay? And there are people who say, I'm not going to open it if you give it to me, so don't waste your time writing it down. Right? So I wouldn't try to shove anything down someone's throat. And I'd also advise that if you're going to have materials, they be handed over in a timely fashion, because the worst thing you can do is get someone halfway down the plan of a major effort, whether it's a golf tournament or UND night or whatever, and then say, and this is how you're supposed to do it. So
I would hope that people are always open to considerations beyond how something should be done, or else that would approach the same, and there's never an opportunity. But especially for new board members, it's so helpful, even if they're not sharing anything.
Right.
They're new to the city or new to the organization, just being able to see how things happened in the past, so when you ask me about it,
mm-hmm.
just have references.
Right.
And that's what I usually say. I think in the cover sheet that we have, we equate it to a living document. We're always looking for feedback. We're always looking to revamp all our materials, whether that's on a club-wide scale for some of our, major club events, but also for just our small, everyday kind of service projects, social events, and that goes the same for the members. We take feedback very seriously, and we're constantly updating those documents. It's not, law by any means, but it's just a good kind of, for us at least, it's a good way to kind of keep track of where we are and continually improving.
We, in Dayton, our plan is not written at all. We are blessed to have, this is where you have to diagnose your own club and how they work. We are blessed to have the active participation of many of our past presidents. And if each one of them had it for 3 or 4 years, that goes back a couple of decades at least. And so our plan, unwritten as it is that they jump in and provide advice at all different times and stages. And we're lucky enough to have, getting advice is not always fun. It's not always effective, but they're the kind of people that can give the advice in a good way. So it's not taken the wrong way as easily as it could be in a different situation. So that's really our plan.
Point. Yeah.
given, and I think that they do have some examples, they really need what they do. At the same time, as large as it is, it is a constant. And I think one of the reasons why some people are reluctant to step up, it can be overwhelming to have to take on major tasks. And while at any one plan should not be at the letter of the law, the very notion to give somebody, you do not have to read them for real. Here's the plan. To even just give somebody some hope.
Right.
That they're not going to have to spend, it's going to be a permanent time to do a certain project, but they're not going to have to use that time to just figure out the real start.
Right. I think that's a good way of looking at it. It's a starting off point. It's, just to get the wheels rolling. And then, obviously there's going to be tweaks here and there depending on who's running the event. I would definitely recommend looking out at other nonprofits that you might work with. I know when we put together our handbook, that's the resource I went to, just to get a sense of really what is useful, what are other nonprofit boards finding as good tools for their members on a regular basis.
Or other clubs when you meet folks at Senate. If you know that East Lansing has a successful golf outing and you're thinking about maybe having a golf outing, look them up. It's not hard to find them on the web. Harrisburg's very process-oriented, and so they're trying to get to where they have a repeatable process for the events. And so that's kind of the direction they're going.
Yeah.
You mentioned having a living document.
Yeah.
Something I mentioned in reading nine this morning, I don't know if Dr. Doug did mention it, that two presidents ago we had documents together, and now it lives on Google Docs, and it literally is
Living.
all
Right.
the time. It's not being done recently, but it is an editable document, something you can look at all the time and say, okay. And what I mentioned this morning was there's always this great fear, I think, from all clubs of, like you mentioned earlier, you have somebody has an event for 20 years, and if they decide one day, I'm done, I'm going to move to Florida, see you guys. The fear is, oh my God, what are we going to do now? So at the very least, it's just a premise that says, here's generally what we do. I think some of the reluctance to having a written book, though, is you don't want to be stuck in that mode of this is what we do and how we do it, because then your event becomes stale, and then there's no growth, there's no incremental growth, like we were talking about the other day, and there's no
Transformational change, right?
I mean, so that's I think the danger in having a document to keep it on life. But I think having something that can be built on over time and as a fallback just in case.
Well, so at the Region 1 meeting this morning, we had an example of another nonprofit, which is the Junior League, and their best practice is that you write a one-pager on what you did for an event. So you don't have to write the exhaustive linked task plans and all that, kind of just say, we had our golf outing, and we had 122 people show up, and we charged $75, and it was at this thing, and we took in this much money, and it cost this much, and we did or didn't make money. And here's a couple things I wish I would have done differently. And it was pointed out that that's particular value now that so much happens by email, that you don't get a single spot where the information resides. So capturing your lessons on a page is a good thing.
That's actually exactly how this Google Docs started.
And that's what we use for literally for our major events. It's on Google Docs. Yeah.
Kevin Hoffman was the one who started. He literally made a form, and after every event, he would hand it to the chairperson and say, fill this out. Now it's easier because now everything's on.
The Google Docs has really worked for us a lot better than the paper. Again, it's going to depend on your club and how it works, but literally it's always live. You can get it, you input your information, and it's really helpful if you have multiple people planning your event because they all have access rights to it.
Sometimes it helps to, if you do have board meetings, and not everyone does, but if you plan some time on the agenda following an event to review lessons learned and you give them 5 minutes, they have to at least think about it, and you can help them then do the form.
I was going to say reflection, I think, is a really big part of this whole leadership process and transition, is really reflecting about the experience, whether that's with the people that are currently running your event and those that are, kind of in the wings coming forward. I think a lot of insight can be drawn from that experience.
You had made the comment that you were moving from the accountant's position into vice presidency and on. If you are the leader and you want to change your plan, I mean, think about that too, because, looking back, we always think about how, well, the accountant, that's a specialized position, but, I mean, do you have an accounting background?
For a year, when I said it wasn't a great fit.
Right.
I've had
But
experience doing finance on multiple different nonprofit boards, so in this particular arena of financial management, yes.
could someone who doesn't have a financial background do this?
It's a task-based role that can be learned, the skills can be learned, and that's why we see it under the umbrella of the university, because they do have the support of community and integrated resources.
Mhm.
When you do need help and guidance, and that's provided the opportunity. We have 3-year staggered terms for our executive members, and then that secretary role is our full-time, so who the role is starting together as our administrator.
Mhm.
So we wanted the flexibility to have everybody come in and out of those positions. So we don't have, say, for instance, we have a lot of people. We don't have a president who's in term anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we wanted to give people an opportunity to learn new skills, to stretch their to insight, things like that. So definitely not how do you think about that?
Yeah, so I mean, if you can kind of think about and design the ideal movement through the positions, I mean, think about incorporating that type of a thing where you can move people through those experiences. They know the full club. They can, this is your chance to leave your mark on this. And the papers and the living documents could be a very handy way of making that happen. We had a club here this morning that was an F-size club. That was the Gettysburg Club that you had mentioned, and they had a very, very formal process. It was shocking. And then Doug with Pittsburgh was talking about the informal way of doing it, and you're a double-A club. So, you really have to take the temperature of how your club will function and, make those affirmative decisions about how to give your people the experience they need to move through.
And then as informal as our process has been, it seems like there's been a trend anyway, which has been young alumni coordinator to vice president to president.
Mhm.
And where I think that sort of makes a lot of sense is, at least in our club, the young alumni council almost operates as its own thing. They report to the big club, but they run their own events, they have their own budget, they manage their own people. So those coordinators are in a good position after they run those, a smaller, game club essentially, to become vice president.
Mhm.
Like I said, as informal as it just happened that way.
How do you incorporate past leaders into your management structure? I know you said.
I mean, obviously every year, the immediate past president serves on our board of directors as a non-voting member. Also, the past 6 past presidents are involved in our nomination process annually. So they're constantly, bringing in new leadership. They have good perspective in terms of who's been involved for a while. We also have a lot of our past presidents involved in our scholarship foundation. So they're pretty abreast of what's going on in the club. I forget which club had this morning, but I liked the idea of they do a past president's dinner. Yeah, so, right,
Wow.
right. Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was a way to not only, recognize their commitment and efforts that they've put into the club in the past, but also to keep that connection and keep that living connection within the club.
Well, we also heard about the club that had the past presidents vote on the club member of the year. And so in order to have any credible opinion on that, they sort of need to stay involved, to keep them hooked. Because you've always heard about people who just fall off the face of the earth and you never see them again. And there's reasons that happens. But if you can think of a way to thank them and keep them engaged at the same time by saying, the only people that get to vote are the current club president and the past presidents, and we'll go and have dinner and we'll talk this out. They kind of have to pay attention to how your club is running through the course of the year, which I thought was a creative solution.
Like I said, I did an informal survey last night of the Club of the Year winners, and I came away realizing that they did they did transition in a lot of different ways, but the one constant that was there for all of them were that the past presidents were still heavily involved in the club. And so that was something that really struck me as being important here.
I've been here almost 4 years now, and this year having our, having our new president come at the same time, it's giving us a chance, in this location, to talk about leadership. So far in our community, I know Pittsburgh's done that, right, you're here with the president.
Yeah, Detroit was here with the president-elect. A couple clubs are doing that, and I think it's easier if you're within driving distance. If you have to put people on a plane, it's a little bit more expensive, but there's really not a limit. You can send multiple people to Senate, so. We talked a little bit this morning about the timing of change, and we had an interesting point from one of the clubs from Florida that has snowbirds, and so they actually adjust the rhythm of the club to the rhythm of the population, and so they do a handover April 1st, which is kind of the end of the busy period, so they have this dormant time to get people up to speed, and they do the dues ask, though, at that time.
March as well, yeah.
Which kind of surprised me. I guess if you do it at March, you can say, hey, we just had a successful year, help us support it. But there's some strategy around your dues requests, and whether you align them to your fiscal year, the calendar year, or the academic year, which is euphemism for football.
I knew to do stuff earlier, what our system,
Yeah, I know San Jose shifted theirs and found that to be a positive impact.
When
So-
do you
We're on the
switch over?
fiscal, so we're, everything board and dues start July 1st. So.
And we do ours at the end of August, which just goes into our kind of quiet period for the club. We have a couple of events in September, but then once football ends, we kind of go quiet for a while, and that gives for us, that's the transition period. That's when the old president can kind of, take care of the last few remaining events and provide the counsel and advice and whatnot for the incoming president, who has a few months to get things underway.
Spokane really only gets a decent-sized crowd, decent being a dozen people twice a year. So there's the Hesburgh Lecture and our UND night, and so the annual meeting is held in conjunction with the UND night. It usually lasts about 15 minutes, and we see who's fogging a mirror and who's willing to serve and run a new slate.
Does anyone do it at a different time?
Yep. In December.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when do you change your officers?
Yeah. Mhm. The one position that you really need to make sure you need to focus on the nuts and bolts of, not just the overhead, but the nuts and bolts is going to be that accounting position again. I mean, you've got to make sure when you do that transition that you've got the controls taken care of, that you have established who has check writing authority, who doesn't, You just can't mess around with that. So throughout this process, although there aren't many rules, that's one of them is make sure you nail that down. And you as president are the one to do that if you're the president.
Yeah.
Any number of things that we had a couple of people who had rights to do it as well, but it wasn't quite clear. It wasn't a person's job. And some things just didn't get messaged out.
Mhm.
Messaged out in a timely manner, so it didn't stop.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, how are other clubs operating? Is there just one communications person that handles like messaging and then a separate webmaster, or kind of secretary handles everything in terms of communication pieces? A little bit of both? Okay.
Sort of different responsibilities for different things. We have a set webmaster, our club administrator, who's our big position, does all of the emails, so put that anything out, and then any communication with the board, executive committee, or advisory committee is done by the secretary.
In Dayton, we have a
Right.
And skills, right? It was an official function, right? Yeah. That's an excellent point about insurance, which we didn't talk about this morning, but under the umbrella of Notre Dame, there is some insurance provided for your events as long as we can document that they're official events. And so if your club operates relatively informally, sometimes it's helpful to send a note to the people who attended your informal meeting to say, now let's just remember, Bat for the Cure is the 19th of May, and our golf thing is the blah blah, and we're going to do 6 game watches at Patty's. And it doesn't have to be hugely formal, but you want to do that.
one.
I know there's a quarterly newsletter requirement, electronic for double A.
So in order to qualify for a program of excellence, no, it is not tied to insurance. And we always, I'm trying to get the required phrase out of my vocabulary because I feel like we're telling the clubs that there's a lot of mandates. And it has to do with being an excellent club, right? So I will encourage them all to do regular communication, but, and it does get them their insurance coverage.
Well, I look at it, you do have to have some kind of periodic work.
One would hope.
Yeah, well, you do. You don't have periodic work when you're not really operating, but you're operating. So, you in that board meeting, whatever, or how often it has, you just give your opinion. And there's no identify all the things you're planning on doing, whether it's the whole year or you say, okay, here are things, and you say, board approved, you do this. And like, you only have one meeting a year, or you have 2 meetings.
I know one club that took the 6 Cs for their club and said, we intend to have a well-rounded program this year, so here's how we intend to do it. And by writing that up in a paragraph, they then had coverage for their year, so. Yeah, telephonic. I can't hear that last part.
Oh, I said, are a lot of folks doing comments and what do you, how often
So the question about meeting face-to-face versus, I know we had a statement this morning about folks having to update their bylaws because the bylaws said they had to meet in person and that they had moved on beyond that. What's Boston doing?
Yeah. One way you could, we're talking about rights to the electronics, one way of getting someone the experience they need, and that's what's nice about the iModules, is that you can turn on just one feature of those electronics. The membership reports and things like that, or some other feature. So you could give someone the experience they need by just getting them hooked up for one of those features instead of all of them, or not the email, but do some of the webmaster kinds of functions. So think about that. That electronic way is kind of restructuring your club, and it's actually restructuring how you do transitions too, is how you give people that experience.
Yeah, we have a free number too. Free conference call? Yeah, that's what we do.
Which is not technically
Technically
free,
free.
but the club doesn't bear the expense. Each individual would pay the long distance charges, but since the world has moved on from that and you have unlimited minutes on your phone, for example, it's essentially free to the participants. Some clubs use their corporate resources.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. There's a limit on the number of callers that can join your conference line. So we only use it for committee meetings. We don't use it for our board meetings, since we would be dealing with upwards of, if everyone joined on the phone, over 30 people. So.
And I believe Skype lets you have up to 20 concurrent folks on a call. And you can do video. There's ways to do video at no expense if people are comfortable with Skype or FaceTime. So there's optionality there. We have a bullet on here that we haven't gotten to yet. I'm just looking at the time, on identifying an emergency plan. Michelle, do you want to talk about that?
So we touched briefly on this in the last session as well, but you never want to be put in that situation where, someone, gets married and decides to move, or gets a promotion and has to transfer to another location, or, heaven forbid, illness or something not as
The
positive.
ASC student isn't accepted.
Right, yeah. A variety of circumstances. So identifying an emergency plan for those types of situations, something that we're doing in Chicago is we're trying to identify bench talent, essentially, is, coming up with a lineup that's pretty far deep in the line in terms of resources for us in case we were put in that situation, whether that's for my full-time position or whether that's for a committee chair or any sort of executive officers, and constantly looking for new leadership, constantly looking for folks that are demonstrating interest in the club and maybe taking on a little bit more responsibility.
And the Google Docs will help you with that. I mean, again, no matter how you feel about the detailed documentation, the more you have structurally written down, the easier it will be for someone to pick up a ball and run with it. So,
Sure. For example, I'm always concerned, like if I get hit by a bus, my question is, if I get hit by a bus, is someone going to know what I do on a daily basis? So one of the first things when I started, and I took on, it was an emergency situation, my predecessor was unfortunately put on bed rest and didn't have time to kind of think through the process. So I literally from day one started writing everything down, things that maybe I didn't think were that important, but would definitely come up on occasion. I just write everything down, anything that comes to mind on a daily basis. I constantly update that document. I also have quarterly meetings with every one of my executive officers. They know exactly what I do on a day-to-day basis, and if something happens, they can step in and at least find some temporary backfill if that were the situation.
So, what should you pay this from the employee
Right.
standpoint, right? From a volunteer standpoint, you're
And that's what I've honed in with my committee members is the importance of, I don't care if it's a one-page sheet that we hand out for our events. You can write held at this location, this number of people, I did X, Y, and Z. A couple of sentences is fine. But without that, we won't have any working knowledge. Again, it doesn't need to be that detailed, but just little bits of information, any sort of nuances about the event I think are really important. And again, life events happen. Someone's not going to necessarily be in that role forever. So again, I think for us, the big push this year is mentorship and getting in these like vice chairs kind of on board, constantly, at these committee meetings, identifying people that are demonstrating high-level interest, are really showing some really great creativity and working knowledge that'll benefit us long-term.
It would be interesting to know what cities, what clubs, we have a big position. What is that job description of each of those clubs? And how many of those clubs have won club of the year? Is there any correlation?
That's an interesting question. In that room.
And LA's yeah, plus. No, they don't.
No.
Pittsburgh.
I don't know, it would just be interesting. We thought about this in Twitter for a long time. I thought we couldn't do that. And the advantage is, from an emergency plan standpoint, secretary of communication, a lot of merit to that position or not.
I mean, I would say, if you want, I'm more than happy to send out the job description that was when I applied. I still have it on file. We've obviously updated it since because there's things that we've started taking on that wasn't relevant maybe when I started 3 years ago. Yeah, and we're actually doing more work on that
And let
too.
me see, I can talk to the president-elect and see if there's an appetite to get some feedback through the U.S. Clubs Committee on, they do a lot of the awards, but they also would probably be the most appropriate venue because the international clubs aren't large enough yet to have paid staff. So let me talk to him and see if we can queue up something for the future and not try to solve it on the fly, but let's try to, yeah.
There are larger cities, there are, a lot of times the population is changing, and I think that is part of why we rely so heavily on our administrator. She's a part-time position, and it's smaller than Chicago anyway. But I say that she's been older altogether, because she's only been there for literally 15 years. So presidents come and go, and treasurers come and go, but she's seen them come and go. And that's why I
And LA,
think you're
and LA is very similar. Hilda's been there for quite some time, and I think in terms of LA, that's my home club growing up. So it's just such a large span of area that they also need it just to physically run all of their events and get the word out. For us, I feel like it's the same way. We just have so much going on that sometimes I'm the one that literally has communication with all the committees. It's not necessarily the president or the vice president or the second vice president. I may be the one reporting back what's going on, but I'm kind of the day-to-day person.
Do you feel you train your leaders as part of the transition?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think part of my role is volunteer management and event management are probably the two biggest components. Yeah, there's administrative duties that, contracts that need to be renewed, things of that nature. But for me, that's kind of where I've come in and kind of taken a larger role.
Okay, I'm looking at the time, and it is my official job to keep us on schedule, so we're running late. But the last point we had on here is to remember the importance of saying thank you. So I want to thank you for joining us, but I also want to remind you that you probably can't ever thank your volunteers enough. So whether it's buying someone a drink, sending them a note, just giving them a call and say, hey, I really was happy with how whatever the event was went off. It means something if it's authentic. So we ask you to keep that in mind, and thank you for all you do for Our Ladies University.
Thank you.
Thank you.